This is what Trump's war on drugs looks like.
I see boats coming in like loaded up the other day with all sorts of drugs, and we're going to take them out.
The U.S. military destroyed these boats in international waters off of Venezuela's shores. Trump is justifying the controversial attacks as targeting narco-terrorists. It's the biggest U.S. military deployment in the region of the 21st century, and it could also be targeting Venezuela's leader Nicholas Maduro's grip on power. So is this really a war on drugs from Venezuela, or is the U.S. up to something bigger in the Caribbean? The Roosevelt Roads naval base in Puerto Rico was shut down in 2004. For the last 2 decades, it was abandoned and slowly being reclaimed by nature. But now, the U.S. military is back, and with their most advanced fighters, Reaper drones, and Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft. Puerto Rico is a largely self-governed territory of the U.S. The U.S. military buildup is not only on the island, it's taking place across the Caribbean, with warships, aircraft, and even a nuclear-powered submarine. And their sights are set on Venezuela.
It's a significant deployment. We haven't seen anything like this in a generation.
Christopher Hernandez-Roy is an expert on the Americas and on geopolitics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a U.S. think tank.
For a counter-narcotics operation, it is much larger than anything that's ever been seen.
For Trump, it's not just a war on drugs, but on terrorism. His administration has designated several cartels and criminal gangs, among them Tren de Aragua, as terrorist organizations.
That's a big one.
The president's thesis is that Venezuela is run by a drug cartel, and Nicolas Maduro sits at the top of that cartel.
This is what Trump posted. Tren de Aragua is operating under the control of Nicolas Maduro. The series of U.S. strikes on drug boats allegedly run by smugglers from Venezuela has killed dozens. United Nations rights experts have slammed the military strikes as lawless and as extrajudicial executions. The strikes stand in stark contrast to previous U.S. counter-drug operations. The U.S. Coast Guard used to intercept such boats and arrest and interrogate suspected smugglers. Now the suspects are simply being blown up.
Venezuela is deeply involved in the drug trade. It's a very important transit nation.
Jeremy McDermott is co-director of Insight Crime, an organization dedicated to studying organized crime.
Venezuela obviously has an enormous coastline, which is the Caribbean and the Atlantic. The stuff going through the Caribbean, some is bound for the United States, but a significant amount is bound for Europe. But the Pacific is more important than the Caribbean or Atlantic seaboards for drug smuggling into the United States. If we look at this from a drug trafficking perspective, it would indeed make more sense to station this flotilla in the Pacific.
But instead, Trump has zeroed in on Venezuela under Maduro, and it's not the first time. In Trump's first term, Maduro was already charged with narco-terrorism in the U.S., and a bounty was put on his head. Now that bounty has increased to $50 million. That's twice the amount the U.S. offered for Osama bin Laden.
What Nicolas Maduro has done is he has created a form of hybrid criminal governance. He's not running directly a drug trafficking organization. His regime has made alliances with criminal actors, including drug traffickers, and he is facilitating and protecting these businesses in exchange for the criminal rents he needs to maintain the loyalty to his regime.
So Trump does have a rationale if this is about fighting drugs. The U.S. has a major drug problem. Hundreds of thousands have died in recent years from opioids, heroin, and fentanyl. Donald Trump promised to stop the flow of drugs. But the size of the Caribbean operation could also indicate something else.
Some think that part of the pressure is, at a minimum, to get the regime to change certain behaviors and provide concessions. And others think that it could be an effort to push Maduro out of power.
And that's what Maduro himself also seems to believe.
El objetivo es entrar y apoderarse de Venezuela y hacer un cambio de régimen en Venezuela.
Maduro has mobilized the population, warning he's ready to declare a state of emergency if the U.S. attacks. Trump has authorized a CIA covert operation. So is the real U.S. goal to take Maduro down? To understand what's at stake, we need to take a closer look at this country, which, by the way, has the largest oil reserves in the world. It shares a land border with 3 countries, and additionally has several island states close by.
I still think that Venezuela is very important geopolitically for the region, not only for the Caribbean, but the entire Latin America and South American geography.
Oskar Schlenker is DW's correspondent for Venezuela. Born and raised in the country, he's currently in Germany.
When our country was in better shape, we were the door to South America.
In the 1970s, Venezuela was one of the richest countries in the region. The main reason? Those big oil reserves. For example, here, the Orinoco oil belt has huge potential, but it's far from being fully used. Today, after years of mismanagement, the Venezuelan oil industry is in disrepair. Corruption and organized crime is thriving, and the population is suffering from poverty, causing millions to leave the country. And growing tensions with the United States led to various sanctions starting in 2005, with Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez.
He had a really anti-American, anti-U.S. Rhetoric. U.S. and Venezuelan relations have been really bad for a number of years now.
Chavez died in office in 2013. Maduro has since installed a ruthless authoritarian regime. When Trump was asked if he wanted a regime change, he downplayed the possibility.
Well, we're not talking about that, but we are talking about the fact that you had an election which was a very strange election.
The U.S. called the recent presidential elections in Venezuela illegitimate and does not recognize Maduro as the president. Opposition candidates have either fled the country or were forced into hiding. That includes opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who got the Nobel Peace Prize for her persistent efforts to restore democracy and defend human rights in her country. Meanwhile, the U.S. is considering military strikes within Venezuela.
I think what the US is seeking to do here is to create fractures or ruptures within the Maduro regime. Everything depends on the military in Venezuela. The military essentially supports the Maduro regime, and of course, it's the main instrument of repression.
And that military has profited from organized crime. So the idea might be weaken the system that keeps Maduro in power to eventually take him down in the process.
I think they are trying to do everything possible or everything at their disposition to try and damage Maduro's administration.
But let's keep in mind, it wouldn't be the first time the U.S. toppled a government led by someone wanted on U.S. drugs charges. That's what happened in Panama in 1989 when the U.S. invaded the country.
There is a historical fear that the U.S.
But hold on. Hasn't Trump promised to keep the U.S. out of new wars?
We will seek friendship and goodwill with the nations of the world. We do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone.
But that might not apply to the region we're talking about. Now it's time to look at the Caribbean as a whole. Remember that U.S. naval base in Puerto Rico? This is Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary, on a warship there.
This might be the single most beautiful picture I have ever seen in my entire life. Looking out at these faces, looking out at this Caribbean, on a floating island of American power.
The recent Caribbean deployment shows there's a shift to hard power.
The perception is the United States has become a bully, and you either do what you're told or you face sanctions of one type or another.
Recently, we called it shared neighborhood, but we might be returning to an older nomenclature of the U.S.'s backyard.
The U.S. operations in the Caribbean come after a few other moves by Trump in the Western Hemisphere. He threatened to take back the Panama Canal. We recently did a deep dive on this. And he, well, joked repeatedly about Canada becoming the 51st U.S. state. He also suggested using force to take Greenland from NATO ally Denmark. We also looked into that already. All this reminds many of a 200-year-old U.S. policy. The Monroe Doctrine is named after the 5th President of the United States. Back then, James Monroe basically warned European powers not to interfere or recolonize the Americas. For many, it seemed to proclaim that this part of the world was clearly a U.S. sphere of influence. Now, Trump seems to be pursuing a Monroe 2.0.
I think what it essentially means is that the United States wants to be the hegemonic power in its region. And it is the hegemonic power, certainly in the military sphere. But in the economic sphere, it has lost a lot of ground to China. And so it's pursuing policies that it feels will ensure that the region follows U.S. leadership.
And here is where that economic sphere really plays out, in Guyana, one of Venezuela's neighbors. The two countries have a decades-old border dispute, which involves oil-rich territories and a major offshore oil reserve. A reserve U.S. businesses have major interests in. To show support for Guyana, U.S. fighter jets made an appearance.
Ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. military flyover. Put your hands together.
So there's also an effect to have the military presence in the region as a deterrent against Venezuela taking any action against Guyana or against the oil platforms in the region.
So how does all this resonate in the rest of the region? Not too badly. Some countries are responding positively to Trump's harsh war on drugs.
This rhetoric really resounds in a lot of poorer people in the hemisphere that are really suffering from the crime and how crime has developed in the region, which brings a lot of violence, a lot of deaths, and a lot of insecurity.
The Caribbean is one of the most violent regions in the world. So this isn't some abstract notion. This is something that tops the political agenda and tops citizen concerns.
One country that has even signaled support for the U.S. naval presence is Trinidad and Tobago, right next door to Venezuela. regional allies are still on Venezuela's side. But what about Venezuela's partners further afield, like China and Russia?
I would have imagined China and Russia to be a little bit more outspoken about these issues, but we haven't heard that much from Putin or from Xi Jinping about it.
Oh, they love it. Well, I mean, if the U.S. Explicitly pursues a policy where it says we are the preeminent power in the Western Hemisphere, and we are going to consider it our sphere of influence, that then allows China and Russia to declare openly without fear that they're going to do the same thing in their regions.
So what at first glance is an illegal attack on boats in international waters seems to be a lot more.
It's too big to be a counter-narcotics operation. It may be too small to be something that could be used for regime change.
So part of the U.S. case is motivated by an actual attempt to stop the flow of drugs into the U.S. But it's also a show of force, a means to secure U.S. interests, and the possible return of a foreign policy doctrine from another era.